Hi, I'm Owen, the host of the Australian Finance Podcast. This podcast is proudly sponsored by BetaShares, one of the leading providers of ETFs here in Australia. Serving thousands of financial advisors and over 1 million investors, BetaShares manages tens of billions of dollars on behalf of investors right across the country. I'm proud to partner with BetaShares on the Australian Finance Podcast, Australia's premier financial podcast, because there is great alignment in the long-term philosophy shared by both businesses. I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Australian Finance Podcast.
G'day, welcome to today's podcast. I'm Pete Wargent from Alan Wargent Property Buyers, and today I'm here with Gemma Mitchell, finance author and advisor extraordinaire. So Gemma, it's great to get in the studio and do some stuff in person.
Yeah, I'm really happy that we could find a studio. You live just up the road, so I'm usually heading to Melbourne each time I want to be in the studio with the rest of the crew. So it's nice to have something like 5 minutes up the road. Yeah,
it's serendipitous. Although they say 5 minutes, it probably took 25 with the school run traffic on the Sunshine Coast these days. But yes, we're just down in Coolum today, so we'll have to try and get the Rask team to get a full-time studio up here for us Sunshine Coasters. So, Gemma, I wanted to run through some ideas with you today. I've just got a few notes here of case studies, because I guess we get people come to us all the time and they say, oh, look, I've got, I'm just sort of, I'm in my 20s or 30s and I've made a start and on my career, but then they're not quite sure what order they should do things. And there's a lot of conflicting information out there. So I thought, well, as the financial advisor, experts, you might be the ideal person to shed some light. So we've put together just a few case studies, and these are not actual people, but they're based on the kind of cohorts that we get come to us all the time. So let's start with a professional couple in their mid-20s. So this is just a case study, but it's pretty representative, I guess, of the types of people that come to us. They're just getting started in their career, saving for their first home, and they've never done it before, obviously. So they need some tips. How do you go about saving for a first home? Who do you see for mortgage advice? How do you sort of learn about the process? Because I do know from when I did it, I thought, I'm supposed to be a chartered accountant. I should know this stuff. I work in finance, but actually looking back, I really had no idea. The mortgage broker was like, do you want to get principal and interest mortgage? Because interest rates were quite high at the time. And I was like, well, yeah, I think so. Yeah, like nodding as though I should know what I was talking about. But looking back, I was really winging it, and certainly was on the process. So what do you normally sort of advise for people in that kind of situation who come to you?
Yeah, this is a really common one. And I think with this age group particularly, it is really hard to buy a house at the moment, cost of living, all these different things. And I find that people here are, of course I'm generalizing, but are either like, yep, property is within my reach and I'm going to go for it, or they're ruling it out and going, I don't see that happening for me.
Too hard basket.
Yeah. But I think at this age, everybody should be exploring it and looking at it, because there's so many different ways that you can start investing, get into property. But what I would be doing here is the most important thing, actually at any age, but to get these people, ahead of the game, is making sure that all the other foundations are sorted. They know what they spend. They know what's coming in and going out. They've got a really good handle on how they manage their bank accounts. They understand like basic concepts of finance. So getting that sorted is so important. It's going to make it so much easier when you've got these massive mortgage payments and you're paying rates and insurance and all the extra stuff. So even if your property journey is potentially 5 or 10 years away, you could be doing so much here that's going to help you with that. So that would be my tip kind of beforehand. But if you think that property ownership is for you and you want to get into your first home, I think you start talking to a mortgage broker kind of as soon as possible, because it might be 5 years, but at least you're going to know a bit of a goal on what you're going to save to, because lots of people out there assume that they need the 20% of a house and go, oh, well, that's never going to happen. But it's potentially 2% or 5%, or you could pay some LMI, lender's mortgage insurance. So just talking to a mortgage broker about what you possibly could borrow for your wage, you then would be like, you could then go, oh, well, I can't on my wage, but if I got X amount of pay rises or change my job, like it might actually be a 5-year plan. So starting as early as possible, talking to people is really, really important. Having your bases all covered. And one thing here I would say is I see people very hung up on getting the first homeowners grant, and that is their whole strategy. Whereas sometimes I think, yes, you might save 20,000 or whatever, which is huge, right? But sometimes it stops us from getting into the property market because we're focused on that saving, but we can't buy in the area that we want, or it's not close to work. Maybe we should be forgetting about the free money if you have the capacity to save, and maybe you go straight to an investment property. But I see people, you know, when we hear tax saving or any kind of saving, we fixate on, well, that must be the strategy we have to go to first.
Well, history does show, doesn't it? If the government puts a scheme in place, whether it's for first home owners grant, stamp duty exemption, or whether it's for a grant to build, like people will take it up. If there's any kind of free money, there's always a big rush. During COVID, people were saying, well, this building scheme is going to be a fizzer in the first couple of weeks. And then it turned into a massive building boom, 100,000 homes under construction around the country. And, you know, it does seem that if there's schemes are there, people take them up. This is obviously quite topical because we're recording this just on the weekend before the election, and the incumbent government is talking about 5% deposits for first-time buyers from January 2026. There's not really much texture around it at the moment, but obviously it's something to have an awareness of because it looks like that's something that's going to come in next year.
Yeah, and it does change where people focus. Like, it's kind of like, well, there's so many different things that you could be doing, but we tend to do what kind of the herd is doing. But potentially if you have a capacity to bypass that, and I know that's a really hard thing to do at the moment, but all I'm saying is we get tunnel vision on, well, something is free or cheaper, or that's what most people do. So that's where people automatically focus. But potentially it doesn't make sense for you to be getting in your first home. Maybe it actually makes sense to have an investment property first. But it depends where you live in your
career, I suppose. Yeah. I mean, you're right. People are very mimetic, aren't they? And we very much tend to do what everyone else is doing. I know we all seem to think we're sort of individuals and different, but actually we're a lot more probably similar to each other than we think. And we generally tend to do similar things at similar times in life. I think, one of my sort of more contrarian views is that I know how hard it is to save for your first home because I've been there, but I don't think it's going to get any easier. If you look at somewhere like Melbourne, you know, an entry-level unit is not that expensive. Like the established units are actually a lot cheaper than new units, and that to me says they're not going to be cheaper, especially if the government introduces a first or a 5% deposit scheme, then they're not going to get cheaper than they are now. I would say one caveat to that: it's a hell of a lot easier in a couple saving than it is on your own. Because I remember from various periods when I was on my own, like, of course you don't want to sit at home and do nothing because you're single. You want to be out there doing stuff, but at the same time, very difficult to save money. So I totally appreciate it's easier.
It's the singles tax, right? Like when you're in a couple, it doesn't cost double for everything.
That's a much better way of putting it than I would have thought of. But
yeah, because right. Like your electricity, like all your utilities don't generally cost more. You're sharing the internet bill with someone. Like there's a tax, we call it, on being single, because your expenses don't halve your expenses don't double when you're in a couple. They tend to go up slightly, but you can share a lot of the costs.
Also, isn't there like a shared goal thing as well? You know, like if you're going to take a year to save your nuts off, probably should think of a better phrase than that. But if you're going to take a year to really knuckle down, I should say, and save for a deposit, it's maybe easier if you do that as a shared goal, because then you can go for, you know, the cheap picnics and whatnot. But so
someone keeping you like accountable and
and you can sort of spend less time eating out and all those kind of things. And doing it together is definitely easier. But anyway, in saying that, I just think yes, in Sydney are very difficult. I acknowledge, but maybe particularly in Melbourne, it seems to me like things aren't probably going to get any cheaper. And let's move down the track a little bit. Let's say we've got a couple in their 30s and they. You know, they're on the housing ladder. They've bought their first, let's say they bought a 2-bedroom unit or something like that. This is where it starts to get complicated, because if life was really easy, we'd just have a formula, right? We'd just say, right, you know, at age 25, you get your career, you start paying down your HECS debt, you get your deposit, you buy your first home. But in the real world,
that would be great if we had that formula.
Yeah, like just look through the the census stats and so on. Like people are, statistically going to have more than one de facto relationship, probably going to have more than one employer, if not career. So life is nowhere near as linear as it might be. But let's say in that situation, I guess you've got a few different things you could do. You could try and accelerate your home loan repayments. You could max out your superannuation because it's tax effective. But again, thinking back to when I was in my sort of early 30s, the super just didn't seem very exciting because even though it's tax effective, you can't really touch it until you're decades down the track. And then I guess you could start investing, whether it's buying a rental property or investing in ETFs like Owen talks about in the Rask podcast. So how do you even know what to prioritize at that stage?
This is a really tricky one because there's so many different options, like you said, and usually at this stage, we're bombarded with media, social media, all these things, and we're seeing people doing heaps of different stuff. And it happens to me as well. I'm like, okay, I'm doing this. Oh, but should I be doing that? And it's really hard to get clear on your path and what makes sense for you because we're, shiny things and getting distracted. So here, I'm a massive fan of superannuation, and I think the most important thing here is probably not putting contributions in. If you have capacity to, that would be amazing. But doing things like making sure your investments are set up properly, your insurance, if you've got it coming out of your super. Like there's lots of little things you can do just engaging with your super that'll make a big difference that won't necessarily impact your cash flow. Because I see for this decade, cash flow is really important. Like potentially here, if you're in a couple, one of you might be taking time out of the paid workforce to raise a family, like to have children. You might be deciding to start your own business or doing a career change. Like there's all these things that impact your cash flow. So while it would be great to, if an investment property was right for you or smash out your mortgage or put money in super, you've got to think about, yes, we might be able to do that right now, but what does the next couple of years look like? And then do we limit our choices? So it's a bit of a balance, and here you need to be really clear on what you want life to look like, which I know is a really hard thing to do, but mainly like don't get the massive mortgage and the massive house if you then want to be a stay-at-home parent for 5 years. You need to kind of go, what decisions do we make today and how can we still service those decisions we make in the next few years? So just getting clear on what that decade might look like is going to then help you decide, can we upgrade the house? Should we be putting money into super? So with super, I would say if you can't cash flow to put extra in, just start learning about it and engaging with it. Investing in shares, I think, is really, really important. But it could be $5 here and there just so you're on the learning curve when it doesn't have to be your full strategy. But I think, having shares or ETFs or, even engaging with your super, because that is a share portfolio, just learning about it so that when that becomes a priority, you've already started.
Familiarity. Yeah. Yes, I think that's a really good point, isn't it? I think if you've never done something before and then somebody says, right, now it's time to pivot towards a retirement strategy, and then you're suddenly moving massive chunks of money across into the share market.
It's scary.
Terrifying.
I see it with like older, so when people I'd see as financial planning clients, they'd be in their 50s, they've paid off their mortgage and their focus was getting your first house, stay in that house, pay off the mortgage. And then they're like, right, now we think we need to start investing. And them, that learning curve of being just debt like focused to then learning about the share market is tricky.
Well, I think of my father-in-law, we've had a few years where interest rates in the UK were zero, but it's just guys that worked in farming, but he would remember the stock market crash of 1987 and he would never put money into the stock market. It's too risky, and then you can't, like they always say, you can't teach an old dog new tricks. But I think that's sort of true to an extent. If you've only ever sort of invested in your business and your farm and land and stuff, and then suddenly someone throws an idea about, well, you can't do term deposits at 0%, start putting money into, Lloyd's Bank or Tesco's or whatever the Poms invest in these days. I think it's difficult. Whereas if you learn that process as you go along, and hey, it's got much easier with ETFs. It doesn't have to be scary.
Yeah, and there's all these different platforms that you can get in with $5 now. It used to be, a minimum 500 or 1,000. It's never been more accessible. But I think we overthink it and we think, oh, if I'm going to be an investor, I've got to have a lot of money. But the learning of it is so important.
I think there's something like a personality type thing here as well. I think some people are, I don't know, you don't want to sort of stereotype, but a lot of people are, they might be sort of accountants or actuaries or, sort of the sort of analytical type of people and very disciplined, and they can map out a 20-year life plan and things like that. I think one of the challenges I had, well, like a lot of expats, so I did my articles or training in London for 3 years, and then I had a couple of years here, then, and then I was in East Timor for a few years, so no superannuation, and I was back in Darwin, I was in Sydney. Like, it's very hard to plan, if you're that sort of freedom focused or experience focused person. For one thing, super balance is nowhere near as good because you're not contributing so consistently. It's also really hard to plan a long time into the future. One of the challenges I found with the stock portfolio, and maybe this is just me, but like when you think about tech algorithms these days, I'm going to Bali next week, and a few months ago, I was looking at places in Ubud, and now I can't even go on the internet without advertisements for like 5-star hotels here, and now from now until forever, I'll be getting adverts for trips to Indo. And I think that's one of the challenges with those liquid investments is there's always something else you could be doing with your money. And, you would see this all the time as a financial advisor, that it's very hard to have the discipline, depending on your personality. But for people who like travel experiences, getting away, things like that, there's always another place to go, another thing to spend your money on. And that's even before you mentioned the kids wanting to go into Intersport and do a trolley dash. So
yeah, and that's why it's so important on being clear, because money is a tool. You want to enjoy it today, but you also need to be looking after future you. So it's just about a balance. Like if you can get your cash flow and everything working really well, be comfortable at the level you're paying debt. Like I know the word budget gives people the ick, but a budget is literally a plan that allocates money in your life. So as long as you're doing things like, well, X amount goes to investing or paying down debt or, future me, we have a travel fund, we have this kind of thing. I think if you can get that clear and working really well in your 30s, it's really ideal. But yeah, this is generally where we're doing the house upgrades and stuff as well. And the other thing that I would love people to think about before they bought their first home, which affects this group here, is when you buy the first home, thinking about what it could be for you next. Like, is it a stepping stone that would definitely get sold to buy the next one? Or does it make a great investment that when you've outgrown it, you would have the choice to either sell it, but you could hold on to it because it would make a great investment. I see people buy their first homes with no consideration if it might be a good investment, and then they become what I call accidental investors, that they go, oh, let's hold on to it, and it makes a terrible investment. And they should have just had a different hat on, an investor hat, when they were making that decision.
Some random unit in Port Douglas or something that you bought on a holiday. Yeah, this is actually very topical. I should get some personal tips here because it's funny.
Oh, you're the property guru.
Oh, well, yeah, but you know what? As an accountant, like a massive part, when you're a CFO in a listed company or something like that, like the annual budget was like a massive part of the whole job. You're bringing in budgets from all the departments. But then when it comes to your own personal finance, so this is so true of accountants generally, they can do a balance sheet and a P&L or an income statement for a company. But when it comes to their own finances, it's, do I have to? Seriously?
Yeah, and they see it as restrictive. It's not. It's literally like your budget could be, I'm going to spend $100,000 a year on travel. It's not saying you're being like tight or restrictive.
Yeah.
It's literally just allocating.
I think it's got so much harder since I've had kids. I mean, the travel thing is expensive anyway.
And you do it a lot.
Yeah, because we've got family in Europe and all the rest of it. But I think the way I've tried to look at it is kind of, sort of big picture. So like car, house upgrade and travel, and not to, I couldn't be the sort of person who does like the weekly, I just couldn't do it. Like I know some people can, and brilliant if they do, but.
Oh, I think you'd get over it so quick. That's like me with exercise. I'm like, right, all or nothing, go for the gym for a week and then never again. And that's what people do with budgeting. They go, oh, I've got to track it and I've got to have, I'm spending $17 a week on X. Like it's not like that.
Not just sustainable.
Yeah, exactly. So you've just got to do what works for you. And some people not having a budget works, but then if you talk to them, they're like, oh, well, I know roughly like X amount. And that is as detailed as their budget needs to be. But a budget is a spending
this is
plan.
Pretty topical, actually. Hopefully Heather can't hear me. She was here earlier. But we're doing a house upgrade at the moment. And I've said I don't normally do budgets, but I really want to have a budget on this because I'm just seeing so many people have massive overruns at the moment with cost of tradies, cost of materials, just everything's expensive. And as you said, I think if the kids are stenciling Brisbane Lions logos into the wall, this is not going to be a house we're going to be easily selling. It's a very niche market for an on-sale, right? So I don't want, we've put aside $250K for the budget for the whole reno, but you can easily see how that could run over if you're
don't they always blow out by minimum like 20%?
Yeah. I mean, there was all those pommy TV shows where people would buy a house to renovate, and at the end of it was Sarah Beanie used to do these shows, and at the end they were like, you've increased the value of the property by 20%, but the market's up 22, so you've actually done nothing. It's very, very common when you're doing a reno. I
would actually love to do a whole episode with you on renos, because I find, and I've done this myself as well, we used to buy and sell properties, and we'd reno them, finally get all the renos done, and then we'd sell them. And I was like, and then one day I actually saw the people that bought the house ripping out the new ensuite, and it crushed my soul. And so I'd love to know, like, we should, talk about this another time, where it's worth doing it and where it's not. Because obviously, you don't, if you renovate your house and you enjoy it for 10 years and then you go to sell it, potentially it's going to need another upgrade
same with investment properties, right? See people putting in expensive kitchens, bathrooms, but in 10 years' time, trends have changed and they end up doing it all again. Anyway, we're getting a bit off topic. Another episode.
What's going to happen?
So let's look at a third scenario. So we're moving down the age brackets a bit. So somebody who's starting again or having a reset in their 40s, whether that's change of career, living arrangements, investment plans, business, like this, I mean,
divorce.
Yeah, we've all had a crack at the de facto relationships, taking a different, the asset reallocation program, as they call it. Like I go to a lot of sort of conferences, and you one of the exercises that people do, draw a kind of a map of your life journey, just on a simple XY graph. And nobody, to my knowledge, has ever done a graph that goes from the bottom left to the top right with no ups and downs along the way. It seems to me the human experience is you're going to have at least a couple of big drawdowns, whether that's who knows what, health, change of career, change of relationship. It's one of the sort of immutable laws of life, is that life's going to throw some crap at you. So, I guess like a massive part of this is firstly, putting together a plan, but also just the psychology of it. Because I know from personal experience with, business failures, relationship failures, like it's very hard. It's a bit depressing. Like you've worked so hard to get to X point, and then you have a pullback, and then you've got to, just keep coming back. So how do you even address that?
Well, this is a shameless plug, but this is literally what my book is about. That is coming out in August, and I might steal the way that you've described that. But this is really, really common. So I find that this is where I work mostly at the moment with people in their 40s. Given that I went through a divorce a couple of years ago, I had to do my own money reset, which is the book. Like I felt like I was on this really straight path. I was ticking the boxes with career, house, investment property. It was all kind of going seamlessly. And then the divorce happens, and you need to rewire your brain, reset all your goals. Like I had a goal to sail around Australia. Like I didn't sail. It was obviously a goal that I had with my husband at the time that is now, off the cards. So it's just about getting really clear on what your new life and direction would look like, whether that was a health scare, a career change, a divorce, whatever it is. But also a lot of the kind of the path that we had, or the options on how we were going to build wealth, might now be off the cards and like off the table, which is totally fine. There's lots of different ways that you can build wealth. But if you've kind of the last 20 years of your life been heading in one direction, potentially you thought property was the only way or something else, it's really, really hard to have that reset where you're now open to other ways. So a perfect example of this is when I divorced, obviously, my ex-husband got the family home, and I was like, I'm okay with that. I can make anywhere home. But I always thought of that as owning a home I lived in. It's 2.5 years later and I'm in a rental. And like I do have property, but it makes more sense for me to rent now. Now that journey of being a homeowner to renting the house that I live in, it actually felt a lot like failure to me. Even though I talk to people all the time about technically it's rent vesting and it's a really solid strategy for a lot of people, it makes sense for me. But that actual mindset shift that I'm in a rental and I've always had for the last nearly 15 years, I've had a house, and it was a huge, something to overcome. Yeah. And and I would always go, yep, this works for me. I know why I'm doing this. Renting works. I've got the flexibility. But then I'd, have days where I was like, oh no, I just want to buy the beautiful house and I want a house that I can renovate and stuff. And then I'd have to come back to, no, this is why you're doing, I get distracted with friends that are renovating their house or buying their beautiful forever homes. I'm like, no, I'm on my path. So this is really hard here where you have to you potentially have to rewire your brain and be open to other opportunities that weren't on the table before. Yeah,
I mean, I guess this is a personal journey for everyone. I think one of the things I have generally found useful, because I mean, you can always look back and say, with the benefit of hindsight, I would have never used a margin loan and I wouldn't have invested in those stupid specky shares. I wouldn't have put money into that startup that went nowhere. I wouldn't have that, but in a sense, that's kind of, it's not really positive or even a useful way to think, because in the end, everything you've done in your life, I mean, this is more of a philosophical question than anything else, but everything you've done in your life today is what's brought you to where you are today. So, I mean, of course, if you're living your life again in real time, you might make different decisions, but it's not actually a useful way necessarily to think about stuff.
No, and even if you think of a reset, so my book's called The Money Reset, and it is resetting, getting back to basics in every aspect, but you're not starting from scratch because of all those experiences.
And
you're starting with experience. And so I think we can't discount the value of making mistakes and stuffing up, right? But yeah, you can reset, you can get back to basics, because a lot of the time I find in the 40s we have overcomplicated things, our mindset, our goals, how we manage our money, everything is pretty complicated. And if there has been a big life shift, it's a perfect opportunity just to get back to basics and then build a strong foundation, because we've probably got a lot of bad habits that have crept in.
I think I'm sure I've learned a lot more from the things that have gone wrong in my, not just, career, investing. I went through struggles with addiction. I've learned a lot more from those things than from things that just went right. And that's probably true of everything, like gambling. You don't win anything by going to the casino and winning a load of money. You learn by losing it, right? And it's the same probably all the way through the journey. I think, I guess one thing that I've found as well, when you have stuff that doesn't work out, is that it actually helps to reset. I started doing a gratitude journal, and it's you know what, things are pretty good. If you'd have said to me 10 years ago, be based on the sunny coast, I'm, recording a few podcasts and going off to a coffee shop, I'd say, well, happy days. You don't sometimes give yourself credit for the things you have learned, the things you have achieved, the experience. You're a published author. There's all these things. And I know when I started out, I never dreamed I'd have written a book. It just wasn't even a thing. Down the track, oh, here we are, published author, and people think it's amazing. And I'm like, well, I don't know, it just, it just happened.
Amazing. But what I talk to people in this space where they are really having that, I don't want to call it a life crisis, but this awakening, right, is we talk a lot about goals, and in finance, we want people to be really clear on their goals. But one thing I actually talk about in the book is it's okay not to know what you're building. So right now I have no idea what family life, what my housing situation or anything will look like in 5 years. Hopefully I've met somebody else and we're doing different things. They might have 100 kids. They might have none. So I don't know what life is going to look like.
Hopefully not 100. Jeez, I'm having heart palpitations thinking about it. But yeah, so you're open to the possibilities.
Yeah, but all I do know is that when I do know what life is going to look like, I'm going to need finances for it. So I don't want to just sit here twiddling my thumbs. I'm building wealth. I'm doing things that align with my life, building my career, building my personal wealth, so that when I decide where I want to live, who I want to live with, what the house is, I'm going to have choice. So yeah, I think we get so fixated on having a specific goal, but maybe the goal is just building things so that we have choice down the track, even if we can't see what that looks like.
Yeah, I think it can be anxiety inducing, can't it? Wanting to have control over the outcome instead of just focusing on the process. That is me,
always need to know. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
but so what I need to focus on right now is making sure I can fund my lifestyle, but I can still, with whatever capacity I have, save, invest, those kind of things that fits in, so that, when I do know the goal and what I want, I'm already either halfway there, nearly all the way there. But yeah, it can be really hard, and people sit in, well, I'm not moving forwards because I don't know what's to come, but you can still be making smart choices even if you can't see what that life might look like down the track.
Perfect. So that's very sound advice. So let's we're now winding through into the sort of pre-retiree cohort. It's quite funny. I did a thing with Sky News a couple of years ago, and they introduced me as a veteran analyst. I was like, hang on, only 12 years ago, I was like promising youngster. And I've gone through from promising youngster to veteran in the space of about a dozen years. But it does kind of come around quick. And I suppose in Australia, much more so than in other countries, we've got a very strong superannuation system. So like it kind of, it's much better than in a lot of parts of Europe, where when the defined benefit pension schemes dropped away, people just didn't do anything. I know so many people who, they didn't buy a house, or they went overseas and then they never really had a pension scheme. And there's in Australia, that's for all of its faults, the superannuation scheme has been very successful. It's in the trillions of dollars. I suppose I did the financial planning exams, maybe 2011 or something like that. But it's always very sketchy to me when I start thinking about superannuation, transitioning to retirement, age pension. Like, how do you even start to think about that? Let's say you've got some pre-retirees in their 50s. They've got their own home and some investments, but then they've got the super. Like, how do you even start thinking about, how do I go from here as someone who's working to somebody who's going to retire? There seems like a lot of different variables there. What do you even start to think about?
So there's the practical side of things, like how that actually works from a cash flow asset. So there's that, but there's also the mindset, that's psychology. That's a really difficult shift. And it doesn't matter what age it happens. Like obviously retirees, it's like 60, 65 when you move out of working to that. And that's a really hard shift for a lot of people because they tie their self-worth and their identity to it. But it also happens younger if you stop working. So my ex-husband stopped working before 40 from a medical condition. And it was the same struggle, like with identity. So it can happen at any time. But for most of us that have healthy, happy, long careers and things, that mindset shift is really, really hard. So from that side of things, not an all or nothing. I'm going to work full time up until 65, and then I'm going to start playing golf and start traveling and start this and start
for
that.
5 days, and then you get bored.
Yeah. No,
so
you've
common.
got to introduce all of these things in and see if that's actually something, like start getting passionate about stuff outside. And it sounds like, of course I'd do that. But people don't. We prioritize what's happening at the moment, which for a lot of us is work. So making sure that you're building passions, identity, hobbies and things outside work is a big thing in this.
I wonder whether this is easier for people who in small business or entrepreneurial stuff versus somebody who's in a, let's say, an executive career. And, when you go to the barbecue, you're like, well, I'm a chief exec of X, Y, Z. And then when you come to a hard stop and then suddenly you can't tie your identity to this. Years ago, I went on a world cruise, and we were the youngest people on the cruise for about 40 years. But it's really interesting observing all these retirees who they sort of introduce themselves. Well, what do you do? Well, I used to be an investment banker. I used to, and people have lost interest because it's something from years ago. I know there's definitely that thing. There's like a few stages of retirement. There's almost like there's the initial holiday phase where, hey, I'm not going to work. How good's this? And then there's kind of a sense of a grieving process where you realize actually, nobody's calling me. I'm not relevant anymore. I'm not in the office 5 days. And, that sense of identity. I wonder if this is, not to generalize, but I think a lot of men struggle with that.
I see it more so with men. Yeah, I do.
I just a gut feel, I guess, because for a lot of us, it's the first question, where are you from? What do you do? And you can't ask people where they're from anymore because that's offensive. So it's like you're left with, that's my only conversational gambit on the Sunshine Coast, where are you from? But what do you do? It's like the first thing you ask about people. And then I guess eventually, like I saw this with my dad, I think in his first year he was doing the sailing thing, and then then there was a sense of like you almost went back to work unpaid like, as a volunteer because you just didn't know what to do. And then
that's my dad. I'm like, stop helping people out. It's just
yeah. And then eventually you find the things, you know, like in his case, he bought some acreage and he's doing gardening, and you know, and eventually you find your place. But it's I guess to go from full-time work to nothing must be impossibly difficult.
Yeah, and you also, so that's from the psychological, but at the same time you're changing from like, if we stuff up our money, right, we're like, oh, well, I can still earn more like next month, kind of reset, I guess. But when you're going from an accumulating phase where you're building assets, building super, saving, to then drawing down on your money, that's a really hard shift as well. So I see, yes, you can go a little bit crazy. I've got spare time, I'm going to spend more. But a lot of the time I see it go the other way where people
oversaving.
Yeah, have a lot of trouble letting go of money because they see now that it could run out. Like, so in this kind of area, like 50s onwards, and I know I've said it at every age, but getting really confident on how you manage your money, your expenses, all of that kind of stuff so that it's flowing really well. So it's going to make that transition a lot easier. It's just about making sure that, like, I see the biggest risk. People think in retirement it's the returns on your money, investments. It's not. It's that you will potentially overspend. And if you do all your overspending in the first few years, that can really stuff up stuff. So getting really clear on your cash flow and what you're actually going to spend in retirement and making sure it's realistic. Like the government says we need X amount in retirement, but that might be totally irrelevant for your life and where you live.
If you're living on the Sunshine Coast at the moment, you might need to add a few, some extra number because it's not cheap. Everything's expensive.
Exactly. And like, yeah, so one of the things I think it's like the government says for a comfortable lifestyle, it's a bit over 70,000. I don't know many retirees that could live off 70,000. So it's, like I think you need to be really clear on what you need for retirement, and don't do it the year of retirement. Do it years and years in advance so you're feeling more and more confident. And that's going to help you plan as well and go, well, how much do I actually need? That answer is dependent on like the bucket of money you have, whether it's super or in other investments. That money that you need is dependent on how much you're going to spend. So the clearer you are on what a realistic retirement's going to cost you each year, you can make sure you're going to hit that target.
Yeah, and I don't want to duplicate content from other podcasts, but I know you talk about things like the 4% rule. Just to give you, it doesn't have to be an exact number, but just a kind of an approximate target for where you're working towards. And I guess the clearer you can be on how much and when and things like that, just makes the process a bit easier.
Yeah, definitely. And then there's we could probably do a whole nother episode on this. There's something called the Centrelink sweet spot, where it's like, yes, there's the 4% rule if you're going to be completely funded. And what that is you having enough of a pool of invested assets that you could draw 4% off a year and meet your income goal. So that's based on a study called the Trinity study. But the opposite way is, well, if you potentially are eligible for some Centrelink, there is a sweet spot from when you've got a certain amount of assets, but you'll be getting either a part or a full pension, and you can, be pretty comfortable from that.
This is where the financial advisor comes in. I'm good on the big picture stuff, for people who are expats and they're moving back to Australia and, thinking about doing a commercial property or something like that. But when people start talking about the how much in the age pension versus the centre, it starts to get very hazy for me. It's too many years since I did it all.
Yeah, and it is complicated because it's so specific to your situation. So I think that there's value of getting actual financial advice, whether it's stress testing what you're doing or somebody doing the plan for you. There's value at every age, but I think here particularly
100%.
What you do in your 50s is so important, especially because, and at 60, regardless if you're working or not, you've got access to your super to do like all these cool, like nerd out on super here, but all these cool strategies. So what you do in those 10 years up to that is going to change what options you have from then and then in retirement. So I reckon financial advice, whether it's one-off, just kind of stress testing what you're doing, a bit of a sanity check as early as possible in your 50s if you haven't already done it is a must.
Fantastic. So I'm just trying to sort of bring this together a little bit. So some of the things I'm taking away here from today, one is I think as you go through, it is a journey for everybody. And I think sometimes what you think is going to happen or what you think is going to be your calling when you're 25 might be very different at 35, 45 and all the way through. Certainly that's been my experience. So I guess to a certain level, being somewhat open-minded, I think I've found that having a sort of a 10-year plan has been useful for me. But often when I look back 10 years on, I'm like, well, none of that was really in the plan. So there's definitely sort of being open-minded to opportunities and things going in a different
plan,
direction.
but flexible is the key.
So that's an important takeaway. I definitely think as I get closer to 60, I'm going to get a really good financial advisor, because I just think that's something you don't want to get wrong, because superannuation is not a big piece of the pie for me, but I know for a lot of Aussies, if you've worked since you were 21 years old in Australia, you're probably going to have a big piece of the pie in your super, and you want to make sure you maximize the benefits there. And I suppose importantly, as much as anything else, try and enjoy the journey, right? There's no point in deferring all your sort of life satisfaction to some sort of mythical end game, because that's kind of not how it works, it seems.
It's the balance.
Yeah. Enjoy what's the phrase? The journey as well as the destination. You got to get one of those cliches in there.
Yeah. Well, tomorrow's not promised to anyone, but we also don't, what's that saying? YOLO? I hate that one. Let's absolutely look after future us while we enjoy.
Instagram. Yeah, that's very good. Yeah, that's right. So, and as they say, yesterday's history and tomorrow's a mystery. So you got to kind of enjoy the journey as you go along. So thanks, Gemma. There's been brilliant insights today. I've certainly got some key takeaways for myself. So we've got a couple more episodes coming up as well. We're going to cover some more bits and pieces for people in the various stages of the life journey for finance and for property and everything else. So look forward to it next time.
See you on the next one.
Cheers.
Thanks for watching this video on the Rask Network. While you're here, don't forget to like and subscribe so you can get videos each and every day on business, finance, investing, and so much more.